Unaware of his wife's $7.5 million inheritance, Daniel coldly dumped her for being crippled. Convinced she was now a burden instead of the woman who once built his dreams beside him. But when he later invited her to his wedding with another woman, expecting her absence, the sound of a helicopter cutting through the sky silenced the crowd as a Rolls-Royce pulled up behind it, and out stepped the woman he left behind. Radiant, powerful, and untouchably rich. How did the woman he discarded rise to such glory? Why did she choose his wedding of all days to appear? And what secret did she uncover after he walked away that changed everything? Scene 1, 1,000 words. The first time Daniel told Claire she was slowing him down, she thought he was joking. He stood by the hospital window, sunlight tracing the hard edges of his jaw, his reflection sharper than his tone. "You'll get better soon," he'd said then, his voice clipped with the forced patience of someone counting seconds. But she never got better. The accident took her legs, and slowly, piece by piece, it took her husband too. Claire had been everything Daniel wanted in a partner. Brilliant, compassionate, and endlessly loyal. Together, they'd built his small construction business from the ground up, her savings funding the first equipment, her accounting degree keeping them afloat when clients delayed payments. But after the accident, something in him began to rot quietly. He started staying later at work, dressing sharper, wearing colognes she hadn't bought. When she'd call, his voice came with background laughter, soft and feminine. "A client dinner," he'd always say. Claire knew better. Love had taught her to recognize lies by the way they breathed. The day he finally confessed, it wasn't an admission, it was a justification. "I can't keep living like this, Claire," he'd said, arms folded. "You're not the same anymore. We're not the same." She sat in her wheelchair, motionless, the sound of rain behind her like 1,000 tiny heartbreaks. "You mean I'm not convenient anymore?" she whispered. He didn't deny it. He left 2 weeks later, packing everything he could carry and leaving behind only the echo of his cologne and a single signed divorce paper. The mistress, her name was Melissa, had been one of their real estate clients. Younger, ambitious, and skilled at stroking Daniel's ego. For months after, Claire drowned in silence. She barely ate, barely spoke. Her hands trembling each time her wedding band caught light. But pain, if you let it stay long enough, hardens into purpose. Her father had died years before, but the lawyer who handled his estate called unexpectedly 6 months after Daniel left. Claire almost didn't pick up. When she finally did, her world shifted again. "Mrs. Bennett," the lawyer had said, voice crisp, "we've been trying to reach you regarding your father's estate. It seems there was a trust fund left under your name, now matured. After liquidations and interests accumulated, the total is $7,523,000. Claire went silent, her fingers tightening around her phone. I didn't know." Her father had been quiet about his wealth, always preferring modesty over show. He'd left her something not just valuable, but powerful. That night she sat in her small apartment, surrounded by unopened medical bills, and the old wedding photo Daniel had refused to take down. She looked at her broken reflection in the glass frame and whispered, "You thought I was finished." The next morning, Claire hired a physical therapist. The work was grueling. Every stretch, every brace, every session felt like fire under her skin. But she endured, not for him, for herself, for the version of her that refused to let pain define her. Weeks turned to months. Her arms strengthened, her posture improved, her spirit sharpened. She sold the apartment, moved to a private estate outside Boston, and invested part of her inheritance into tech startups and real estate. Ironically, the same business Daniel had abandoned her for. Every deal she made, every profit she earned, carried a quiet satisfaction. 2 years later, Claire Bennett was a name whispered in business circles, not as a pity story, but as a financial force. Her story was featured in magazines, though she always refused interviews that asked about her accident or her ex-husband. Some wounds were best served in silence. Then one afternoon, an envelope arrived. A white, glossy wedding invitation sealed with gold foil. It read, "Daniel Miller and Melissa Hart request the honor of your presence at their wedding ceremony." For a long moment, Claire simply stared at it. It wasn't anger that filled her. It was amusement. The audacity, the irony. She could have thrown it away. But revenge, when served with elegance, required patience and performance. She sent her RSVP with one word: attending. That night, she made a call to her assistant, Avery. "Book the helicopter," Claire said calmly, "and the Rolls-Royce, the Phantom model. I want it ready in 2 weeks." Avery hesitated. "For the wedding, ma'am?" "Yes." Her tone softened, but her eyes didn't. It's time he remembers who he walked away from. As she hung up, Claire gazed out her window, the city lights shimmering beneath her estate. The woman Daniel left behind no longer existed. The one rising now, polished, poised, and quietly vengeful, was something he could never touch again. And deep down she knew, showing up would be more than revenge. It would be revelation. The real question wasn't what she would do at that wedding. It was what Daniel would do when he saw her again, alive, unbroken, and wealthier than his wildest dreams. The wedding venue glittered with excess, white roses cascading from marble arches, crystal chandeliers hanging from the tent ceiling, and a string quartet playing soft jazz by the lake. Daniel Miller had spared no expense to make this day the grand declaration of his new life. He walked among guests in his tailored charcoal suit, shaking hands, smiling wide, and pretending not to notice how often people glanced at Melissa's diamond ring or whispered about the woman he'd left years ago. Melissa, radiant in her silk gown, posed for photographs near the fountain, laughing lightly whenever Daniel came near. She was beautiful, there was no denying that. But her beauty had a calculated quality, like something borrowed rather than owned. Beneath her charm was the hunger of someone who'd always wanted more. "Everything has to be perfect," she kept repeating. "This is the start of our forever." Daniel nodded each time, but a strange unease tugged at the edges of his mind. Maybe it was the way her laughter sometimes reminded him of Claire's, or how the smell of the lilies reminded him of the hospital room where he'd left his wife sitting in silence. He shook the thoughts off. That life was gone, buried with the woman he'd convinced himself couldn't live without him. The guests began to settle, the ceremony minutes away. The officiant cleared his throat, the music shifted, and the bridesmaids started down the aisle. Daniel took his place under the arch, his chest swelling with a false pride that masked his nerves. He was marrying the woman who made him feel alive again, or so he told himself. Then came the noise. It began as a low hum in the distance, barely noticeable over the music, but it grew louder, steadier, until conversations froze and faces turned toward the sky. The quartet stopped playing. The officiant paused. Even Melissa frowned, her grip tightening around her bouquet. Over the lake, a helicopter approached, sleek and black, its blades slicing through the air like a warning. Guests gasped, shielding their eyes as the downdraft swept through the aisle, scattering rose petals and rippling dresses. The chopper descended slowly, its reflection glinting off the water, and hovered just long enough for every camera to turn its way. Then from the driveway came the second sound, a low, luxurious purr. A Rolls-Royce Phantom, black with silver trim, rolled to a stop in front of the venue gates, its doors opening with quiet authority. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "Who on earth is that? Is it a celebrity? Was anyone else invited like that?" Daniel's pulse quickened, his mouth dry. Something about the scene clawed at his nerves. The helicopter's engine finally slowed, and a driver stepped from the Rolls-Royce, moving swiftly to open the rear door. Out stepped a woman, poised, statuesque even in her seated frame, her wheelchair custom-made with chrome accents and embroidered leather. Her dress shimmered beneath the sun, a deep emerald that caught every light, and her dark hair framed a face too familiar to be mistaken. Claire. The crowd collectively inhaled. Daniel's world tilted. He blinked once, twice, but there she was, his ex-wife, the woman he'd left to wither, looking like a queen who'd come to reclaim her throne. "Good God," Melissa muttered, her voice tight. "That's her?" Claire smiled, soft, composed, deliberate. She moved forward as cameras turned, her assistant following behind. The guests parted almost instinctively, as though royalty had entered the room. Even the officiant stepped back, unsure of what to do. "Hello, Daniel," Claire said, her voice smooth as velvet. His throat tightened. Claire, I didn't... How... What are you doing here? She tilted her head, pretending to think. I was invited, she said, showing him the gold-trimmed invitation. It would have been rude not to attend. After all, I helped build the man standing under that arch, didn't I? A murmur rippled through the crowd. Melissa stepped forward, her jaw stiff. You're disrupting our ceremony. Claire's gaze turned on her, calm, unbothered, and disarmingly kind. Relax, Melissa. I'm not here to stop your wedding. I'm here to congratulate you both. The way she said it, graceful yet laced with something dangerous, made Daniel's stomach twist. One of the photographers whispered, That's Claire Bennett, isn't it? The investor who bought 3 real estate firms last year? Another voice followed. She's worth millions now. The whispers multiplied. People began pulling out their phones, checking articles, murmuring figures. Daniel caught fragments. $7.5 million trust. Bennett Estates, CEO of Lumeris Holdings. Each word landed like a dagger. Claire reached into her clutch and pulled out a small velvet box. She handed it to the officiant. A wedding gift, she said sweetly. You'll find it generous. When the box opened, a collective gasp spread through the audience. Inside was a single check, addressed to Miller Hart Development LLC, the business Daniel and Melissa had started together, written out for $1 million. Daniel stared, confused. You're donating to our company? Claire smiled faintly. Consider it an investment. She leaned closer, her voice just loud enough for him to hear. You'll need it after next week. He frowned. What do you mean? But she was already turning away, her chair gliding effortlessly down the aisle as the helicopter's blades began spinning again. The music restarted, but the atmosphere had changed. The guests were no longer watching the bride. They were whispering about the ex-wife who arrived in a Rolls-Royce and left in a helicopter. Daniel tried to continue the ceremony, but his focus was gone. The vows stumbled out, hollow, his mind spinning with questions he couldn't shake. After next week, what had she meant? Why had she given them money? Melissa's smile faltered as cameras caught her expression, strained, uncertain, overshadowed. For the first time that day, she realized she wasn't the main spectacle. When the ceremony ended, Daniel retreated to the edge of the garden, hands trembling as he scrolled through his phone. Headlines were already popping up. Claire Bennett, millionaire investor, shocks guests with unexpected wedding appearance. Ex-wife of Daniel Miller arrives in Rolls-Royce in helicopter at his wedding. He felt the blood drain from his face. This wasn't just a social ambush. It was calculated. And if Claire had taught him anything, it was that she never moved without purpose. Somewhere over the horizon, the helicopter disappeared into the clouds. But Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that she hadn't left the story at all. She'd only just begun it. 3 days after the wedding, Daniel's phone wouldn't stop ringing. At first, he ignored the calls, assuming they were reporters hungry for gossip. But by noon, his partner, Ben, stormed into his office, slamming a stack of files on the table. You want to tell me why half our investors are pulling out? Ben barked. Or why Lumeris Holdings just filed an acquisition claim on 3 of our active projects? Daniel froze. Lumeris Holdings? Yeah, Ben spat. The same company Claire Bennett owns. Your ex-wife. Ring a bell? The words hit him like a hammer. He snatched the files, scanning through the documents with trembling fingers. There it was, clear as day. Lumeris Holdings had quietly bought the land rights to 2 of their largest developments. Their contracts were airtight, their deals already sealed. It meant Daniel's company couldn't legally build there anymore. It was checkmate. Daniel sank into his chair, his breath shallow. She planned this. Ben leaned forward. You think? She must have been working on this for months, maybe years. Every one of your project proposals, she's already countered them. The woman's 10 steps ahead. Daniel's stomach churned. The $1 million gift from the wedding flashed in his mind. You'll need it after next week. It hadn't been kindness. It had been prophecy. She'd known exactly what was coming. By evening, the company's stock had crashed 30%. Investors were fleeing, contracts collapsing, and whispers of fraud began circling online. Daniel spent the night in his office, surrounded by chaos, while Melissa paced behind him in her wedding dress, the hem still faintly stained from the ceremony. "This is insane," Melissa snapped. "She's ruining us out of spite." Daniel didn't answer. He knew Claire too well. This wasn't spite. It was justice in silk gloves. At dawn, an email arrived. It was short, with no subject line. Only one sentence. "You built your empire on my shoulders and left me in the dirt. Now I'm reclaiming what I helped create." Honestly, see, attached was a legal document. Claire had officially acquired controlling shares in 3 of their joint companies, including one Melissa had recently co-founded with Daniel under his name. The evidence of tax manipulation she enclosed was damning. Emails, transfers, fake invoices, all signed under Daniel's signature, though orchestrated by Melissa. Melissa went pale. "She hacked us." Daniel turned toward her slowly. Or maybe she just knew where to look. That night, Claire watched the fallout from her penthouse. The news played on every screen. Miller Hart Developments under investigation for financial misconduct. Reporters hounded Daniel's office. Investors demanded refunds, and Melissa's social media pages were flooded with backlash. Claire didn't smile. Not yet. Revenge wasn't just about destruction, it was about balance. A knock at her door broke the silence. Avery, her assistant, entered holding a folder. "Ma'am, the transfer went through. All 3 properties are now under your ownership." Claire nodded. "Good. Have the legal team make sure he can't buy them back. Ever." "Yes, ma'am." "And the press release? Scheduled for morning. It highlights your acquisition success without mentioning his name." Claire exhaled, gazing out at the night city. Perfect. But beneath her calm, something ached. A memory, a ghost of what once was. She remembered Daniel's laughter, his promises, the way he used to hold her hand when dreams were all they had. There had been a time she believed love was enough to make him stay. She had been wrong. The next afternoon, Daniel showed up at her office unannounced. He looked hollow, unshaven, eyes bloodshot, the arrogance drained from his face. Security moved to stop him, but Claire raised a hand. "Let him in." He walked in slowly, his pride trailing behind him like a broken banner. "You've made your point," he said quietly. "You've destroyed me." Claire studied him, her expression unreadable. "Destroyed? No, Daniel. I only took back what you stole." He clenched his fists. "You think this makes you better than me? You think this fixes anything?" She wheeled closer, her gaze piercing. "Fix? Nothing fixes betrayal, Daniel. You didn't just leave me. You abandoned me when I needed you most. You replaced love with convenience, and now you're standing in the ruins you built yourself." He said nothing. His silence spoke louder than any apology. "You know what hurts the most?" Claire whispered. "I would have forgiven you, even after the accident, even after Melissa. But you didn't just leave. You humiliated me. You made me believe I wasn't worth loving because I couldn't walk." Her voice broke slightly, but she straightened, regaining her composure. "So I decided to walk again in the only way I could, by stepping over everything you thought I couldn't have." Daniel's jaw tightened. "What do you want from me, Claire?" "Nothing," she said softly. "I already have everything." As he turned to leave, she added, "Oh, Daniel, you might want to check the deed on your new house. It's under my real estate firm now." He froze mid-step. "You?" She gave a faint, cold smile. "You really should have read the fine print. You bought it through a subsidiary I own." For the first time, he looked defeated, truly defeated. Melissa left him a week later when the investigation turned public. She'd tried to spin the media narrative, but the evidence Claire had strategically leaked made her untouchable in the worst way. Fraud, misappropriation, embezzlement. The headlines ate her alive. Daniel, stripped of everything, his business, his house, his reputation, sold his car and moved into a rental apartment downtown. The man who once measured success and power now counted it in silence. One evening he saw Claire again, not in person, but on television. She was receiving an award for entrepreneurship, her speech humble yet powerful. "To those who've faced loss," she said, her voice steady, "remember that pain can either paralyze you or propel you. I chose to rise." Daniel turned off the TV, unable to breathe. He'd thought she was broken, but he'd been wrong. She had only been rebuilding. Weeks later, as Claire sat on her balcony overlooking the city, she allowed herself one small smile. The air was quiet, the night calm, and for the first time in years she felt peace. Not the kind that comes from victory, but from closure. She whispered softly to herself, "You thought you left a cripple, but you only created a queen." Somewhere downtown, Daniel sat in his dim apartment, staring at an old wedding photo he hadn't thrown away. In it, Claire smiled at him the way she never would again. And for the first time, he realized that losing her hadn't just cost him love. It had cost him everything. A year later, Boston buzzed with talk of the new Bennett Foundation for Rehabilitation and Resilience, a state-of-the-art center dedicated to empowering accident survivors and individuals living with disabilities. It wasn't just another charity on a billionaire's list. It was Claire Bennett's heart turned into action. The facility stood on a stretch of land once owned by Miller Hart Developments, now transformed into something far greater. The marble sign at the entrance read, "For those who were told they couldn't rise again." Claire wheeled through the gleaming halls that afternoon, greeting patients and staff alike. Her emerald eyes softened each time she saw a spark of hope in someone learning to stand, to walk, to believe again. Every smile she saw was a quiet victory over the darkness that once nearly swallowed her. Her assistant, Avery, walked beside her. "The mayor confirmed his visit next week," she said, "and the press wants a statement about your new scholarship program." Claire smiled. "Tell them it's not about me, it's about second chances." As they moved past a therapy room, she paused. A young man was struggling with braces on his legs, grunting with effort. His therapist encouraged him gently, and when he finally took 2 unsteady steps, the room erupted in applause. Claire clapped softly, tears threatening her composure. That had once been her. That had once been her beginning. Outside, autumn leaves danced across the courtyard. Claire rolled onto the terrace, taking in the view. The same skyline where her old life had crumbled, and her new one had been built brick by brick. Her phone buzzed. A message flashed across the screen. "Saw the foundation opening on the news. You did something good, Claire. Daniel." For a moment she said nothing. Then she typed back, carefully, deliberately. "I always did good things, Daniel. You just didn't stay long enough to see them." She set the phone aside and turned her face toward the breeze. There was no anger left, only clarity. She didn't need his remorse. His message wasn't closure. She was. Across town, Daniel sat on a park bench watching construction workers rebuild a small playground. He was thinner now, humbler. He'd found a job as a site inspector. Less money, more solitude. Sometimes when he passed by billboards of Claire's foundation, a quiet ache stirred in him. Not envy, regret. He knew he'd walked away from more than a wife. He'd walked away from the best part of himself. As dusk painted the city gold, Claire met with a group of investors in the foundation's garden. Among them was a woman in a wheelchair, newly widowed, afraid to start over. Claire took her hand gently. "Pain doesn't mean you're finished," she said softly. "Sometimes it's just where your story changes chapters." That night, after everyone had left, Claire stayed by the window of her penthouse. The city glowed below, alive, forgiving, infinite. She raised a glass of white wine to the stars. "To rebirth," she whispered. And as the wind brushed her face, it carried away the last traces of the woman who once waited for love to save her. Because Claire Bennett didn't wait anymore. She rose, and the world would never forget her again.